Chandler, and I'm here with Dr. Charryse Johnson, clinical psychologist, mindfulness practitioner, and author of the book, Expired Mindsets, Releasing Patterns That No Longer Serve You Well. Welcome, Charryse.
Thank you so much. I am excited to be here.
We're so happy to have you, and I'm so glad it worked out because we had to postpone a little bit. You
Yeah.
get some pretty powerful weather where you live.
Yes, it was a very interesting dynamic where we were like, okay, everything is dark. So I didn't think that would work well for your listeners.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we were able to reschedule.
Yeah.
Um, so we're talking a bit today about the book, Expired Mindsets. And can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and what is an expired mindset?
Yeah. So I wrote the book in the middle of the pandemic. And I have to be honest and go, it was not initially my idea. My, at the time, 21-year-old daughter came and said, Mom, I really think you need to write a book. And I said, I really think you need to go away because it is the middle of a pandemic and I'm a mental health therapist and there's a million things going on right now. But it actually wasn't long after that conversation when I realized how many people were feeling like their cracks were exposed because life had slowed down. They weren't able to use all of the vices and the busyness that they once used to avoid things that were unresolved. And I wanted to create something that people could use as a reflective and mindful process to go, what do I need to expire? If you think about food, we know, okay, at this date, it's no longer good or it'll make me sick. But we don't think about our mind that way. And we could be carrying mindsets and thought patterns that at one point in our life may have been helpful, but then in a new season, they're not helpful, but we're still stuck on them. So, an expired mindset is anything, any belief that you have that is keeping you stuck or making you feel like you're struggling to make progress or just getting in the way of you being the person that you really know that you are and want to become.
Great. And can you give an example of an expired mindset?
Yeah. One example could be this always happens to me.
Mhm.
And that can be a very common thought when we've had an experience that has been uncomfortable that we feel like happens over and over. If we are in relationships and we feel like they don't last, or we don't feel like people understand us well, and then we're constantly having to recommunicate ourselves, it creates this always happens to me. So why try? Is usually the other aspect of it. But if that's our belief system, then we won't be courageous. We won't be willing to go, there are people who hear us, and it's okay to communicate, and our voice matters if we think it's going to happen anyway. So I'm just going to stay where I am. We become the victim instead of the victor.
Mhm. And we create the repetition, right? Like so kind of become complicit in that. Not to say we're doing some, we're consciously doing
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
but
It's subconscious, but it definitely can play out consciously because the way we look at ourselves, the way we interact with other people is going to be based on our belief system. So if I have all of these elements of my belief system that came from things that have hurt me and I'm trying to protect myself, because a lot of those mindsets can be protective, then yeah, how we interact isn't going to be as authentic or as open. And it becomes like a self fulfilling prophecy where I'm looking for someone to do what I think that they're already going to do
yeah.
even before that happens, if ever.
Mhm. And in the book, you share your own personal experience and the experiences of trauma and grief, which really makes this very accessible, I think, to people. And so you have your own experience of navigating and changing expired mindsets.
Yeah, more experiences than I wish that I had. And, when I first started thinking about, how I wanted to put together this book, this resource, I wasn't sure which direction I wanted to take it, but I knew I don't want it to feel like a textbook. And I just thought about, well, how do I engage with people? I wanted people who knew me to go, oh my goodness, I could see her saying that. That's exactly how she talks or interacts with people. And I do try to share my story. Now, there's an appropriate line to that, of course, if you're, a client, but there's still a way of normalizing that all of us have things that we navigate. And I didn't want people to feel like I'm this psychologist here and you're learning from me versus I've been through some difficult things and here's what I've used to help me. And now it's your turn if you would like to participate.
You're humanizing it. And
Yeah.
I think we've lived in a culture that for so long has resisted the idea of having difficulty,
Yeah.
having difficulty mentally, emotionally, physically even.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so we've kind of created an us and them mentality that we're hopefully coming out of. We
Yeah.
see that more and more. And I think books like yours
Hmm.
help bring that. But I guess my point here is that what we refer to as trauma
Hmm.
is, a that may be a bit of a charged word, but it
Yeah.
refers to the human experience.
Yeah.
We're all going to experience difficulty and pain and loss and
Hmm.
suffering, right?
Yeah. Well, I did something recently where I was working with a group of people at Microsoft and I took the word trauma and then came up with like 20 different synonyms because I do recognize that word can feel very charged and overwhelming and isn't going to land on everyone. But the most basic definition of trauma is too much, too fast, too soon, or anything that you experience that was beyond your ability to manage at the time. And that I feel like we could all see moments where, yes, I was stressed about this. And so when this happened, it felt like it was too much.
Mhm.
And then things kept coming too fast. And I wasn't over them yet before the next thing came. And that definition is the one that I try to use in the book or when I'm working and speaking and encouraging people so that we can normalize. It's not always the big, huge things. Sometimes it's just the little moments where life didn't give us a chance to catch our breath that we have to work through.
That's really helpful. I think that's an excellent way to approach it. And, furthering that idea is things that may not be traumatic for us, overwhelming for us as adults may have been as children, or something that may not be overwhelming to you
Mhm.
overwhelmed me in the moment. So, I always give kind of an example of, when you're 4 years old and you get lost in the grocery store for the first time
Uh-huh.
and you're separated from mom or dad and you're like, it's the scariest thing on the planet.
Mhm.
Then, the store shop owner gives you a lollipop, finds mom, and everything's okay, and you go
Yeah.
on. But there may be a part of you
Mhm.
that was impacted. And then for some other 4-year-old, it was like no big deal.
Yeah. And I see that happen a lot where people are able to kind of reconnect with here's how I'm showing up right now as an adult. And I really don't understand why I'm responding this way. And then we kind of explore, and they're like, I would have never thought of that dynamic. I'll give you an example, and this comes from client work many, many years ago. And my clients will periodically go, and you have permission to share this story if it'll help someone. But essentially, it was a woman who felt like she never wanted to be in a situation where she was given responsibility or leadership. It was terrifying for her. She was very capable, but just feared it and also knew it was standing in her way because she would be in different situations where people would go, I see so much in you. I love for you. And she would kind of freeze along the lines of our work together, what we realized is there was a change in her family when she was younger. And as a result, she had to take responsibility for her younger brother that was just a few years younger than she was. But there was something about that shift that moved her away from this carefree childhood to now I'm responsible and I don't really know how to do this. And if anything goes wrong, it's my fault.
Mhm.
And that was the narrative. So fast forward, she's delayed all these opportunities to grow for growth because she has been fearful that if she stepped into that role with other people and they did something wrong, it would be her fault. And that was so embodied and embedded in her that she would just stay very small to try to prevent it from happening.
That's a really great example. And there are a couple of things that come to mind where I want to go next. And one is that, you say trauma is stored in the body.
Mhm.
And I think that's true. And I think we more and more we've been coming into awareness of the mind, spirit, mind, body connection, and that's becoming more relatable to people.
Yeah.
But can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. We are an integrated system. It is not possible, although we would love to say that it is, to separate what's happening mentally from what's happening physically to what happens in our spirit nature, regardless of where anybody aligns on that aspect of spirituality. So if you take a moment and you think about something that overwhelms you or frightens you, you're going to feel it in your body, right? It's going to feel like I have a boulder on the top of my chest or my shoulders or my neck. We store difficult experiences in our fascia, which is like our muscles and our body, and we carry it. And we're not always conscious that we're carrying it, but then it shows up later in chronic physical conditions such as eczema or digestive GI issues or fibromyalgia or just chronic pain and fatigue that feels unexplained, but it can be the cumulative impact of different things that we had to figure out, that we thought we let go,
Mhm.
but then realized, oh, I'm still kind of carrying the weight of this. And so that's actually how I started layering and studying the importance of mindfulness work and somatic, which means nervous system and how it organizes, because those thoughts are also attached to a body sensation. I go into a room, and if I am anxious because I'm worried that I'm going to be judged incorrectly, I'm going to feel it. Then a thought comes, and then simultaneously, I'm responding in some way to try to manage that feeling. And then we can get into things like, so now I might drink too much because I'm trying to reduce that anxiety, or people can get into various substances and behaviors and nervous things that they don't realize. So it's important for us to be able to holistically really honor how can I calm my body, which is going to then give me access to a new way of thinking.
Very helpful, very helpful. And, as you described with your client,
Mhm.
she, or earlier when you described that we distract ourselves, we may distract ourselves from these things that are going on. We may be getting little signals from our physical selves or our emotional selves, and we are able to distract.
Mhm.
And then COVID made it a little more difficult to do that.
Little more difficult.
And your client was an excellent example of how you were able to um, go beneath the surface. I think you call this the
Yes.
iceberg,
Mhm.
and start to just to explore more by just being creating the spaciousness of mind and body.
Yeah.
And you do bring up the shadow,
Mhm.
which is part of where we store these things from, and kind of psychologically.
Yeah.
And making peace with the shadow, I think, is a
Mhm.
chapter title. And
Yeah.
so I'd like to talk about that, and also just head into it with the shadow's not the monster. That we
It is not the monster. Yeah, shadow work is a huge psychological concept. One of my favorite books around that is by Dr. Robert Augustus. And it's important for us to see that the shadow, which means that part of us that feels like it's just hanging over us and looming that we don't necessarily appreciate, and those body sensations are messengers. And that's a big aspect of what I want people to hear. And if they read Expired Mindsets, to go, instead of me distancing myself from my shadow and viewing it as something looming, can I listen? Can I tune in and go, what is it trying to tell me? What is it guiding me and letting me know that I need, so that I can put myself in relationships or environments that help me feel like, oh, there's a little bit more light here. So the shadow isn't casting as big, or my body feels a lot better in this space. Because if we're constantly busy and disconnected with our body, we don't always catch, okay, something has changed, or I don't feel very good here. And I don't have to know why, but can I just honor that and listen to those emotions and sensations, even when we feel like they're really uncomfortable?
To add to that, I think when we've created fear around feeling it, or defense mechanisms around feeling it, it's bigger than it is. And then when we get to it, like with your client, it's like, oh, huh,
Yeah,
okay.
she was like, who knew? Like, she was looking, right, and searching for, it has to be some big lifetime event that happened as an adult that has scarred her, but was like, I can't find it. And so I was like, well, let's be curious. I'm a huge proponent of, instead of judging what we're experiencing, non-judgment, which is an aspect of mindfulness, means, can I just be curious and step back and observe and see what I notice? Because it is not always like a blinking light. Sometimes it takes a little exploration and discovery, but it's so valuable when we can go, oh, okay, well, duh, that makes so much sense. And now I'm informed and I know how to care for that part of myself. Because I do want to acknowledge that sometimes when we explore and something is uncovered, it doesn't mean it's going to go away.
Mhm.
Um, but what it means is, I know that it's there, and I know the situations that intensify it. I know the situations that help create calm, or I know when it's bigger than it needs to be, which might be a sign that I need rest, or I need fun, or I need other things to balance it out.
And I think when you're talking about those things that don't maybe go completely away, we're talking about some of our bigger core issues
Yes.
kind of our our work in life, in a way, our lessons in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that as we become aware that we have these tools of bringing awareness to it, consciousness to it,
Hmm.
they lessen. And then we have more tools and ability to navigate it. For
Correct.
example, perhaps like with depression, it can feel completely overwhelming and like it will never end. But if you're aware of their triggers, for instance,
Hmm.
you can help yourself realize, oh,
Yeah.
I'm triggered. This isn't real. This isn't in the
Yeah.
moment. I need to take care of myself in this moment
Yes.
and let it pass. And then it can have a shorter
Yeah.
impact, perhaps.
Yeah, no, you are spot on. And you said something so important, letting it pass. We have those experiences, and the fear of them intensifies them.
Yeah.
The trying to push it away and look for things outside of us to get rid of it is what makes it bigger. It's like fuel. So we have the tools. I'll also sometimes give the analogy of, when we don't know what's happening, or we haven't learned to kind of befriend these messengers in our emotions and our sensations, they are driving the direction of our life.
Mhm.
But when we learn how to have daily practices and vital habits, I like to call them, that help anchor us and ground us, then what that allows us to do is to go, man, when these sensations came, they used to feel like they were screaming at me. But now, as I care for myself, it's just a whisper. And I
Mhm.
realize that I don't have to listen, I don't have to respond to that lowering sensation anymore because I can trust it's going to pass. And if it comes, I know what to do. I have those tools and I can use them and support myself early on when it's just sadness before it gets to deep, perhaps clinical depression. And that's the difference.
Yes, yes, yes. And I really like that, part of mindfulness practice and what you're bringing forward, which is just really helpful, is having those kind of being organized and having your positive routines that you do that just ground you. Like that is so,
So much.
yeah, yeah.
So important. And I think it is highly undervalued. A lot of times when I am working with people who've come and talking about various challenges or distress, some of the most foundational things that I will speak about with them first is how's your sleep?
Mhm,
How's your hydration?
mhm.
How's your nutrition? And they're like, what does that have to do with anything? Everything,
Yeah.
right? That is core. What are your mornings like?
Mhm,
So I encourage people to wake up and first start with a few deep breaths before they jump out of bed into life, just a few inhales and exhales,
mhm,
and kind of scan and go, what am I noticing? Right? How does my body feel this morning? Am I noticing that there's anything that has been on my mind? Did I not sleep well? Those few minutes of centering and creating that morning routine then allows you to wake up and go, I don't feel great today. So, do I need to readjust my schedule so
mhm,
that I don't add stress to the stress that I'm already feeling because maybe I had a rough night? Maybe someone that I love is not well, so I'm carrying, or and then that allows us to inform ourselves throughout the day and then keep checking in and coming back to ourselves. I'm a
mhm,
big proponent of not just doing it in the morning, but just have 30 to 60 seconds a day where you also just stop and go, how am I?
mhm.
What am I noticing? And what do I need?
Mm. So
Mhm.
helpful, so helpful. And in talking about, expired mindsets and releasing patterns, you do get into the science of it and about neuroplasticity. And, I had a guest recently who wrote a book called basically a rewiring the brain.
Yeah.
And, in some ways we're kind of reaching this intersection of, spirituality, spirit care, and science, which I love because we need that to come forward more and more. And so, these things that you're suggesting, which are really helpful, also help repattern the brain,
Yes.
right? Can you talk
Yes.
a little bit about
I can. And if I talk too long, just hold up your hand because I
that?
just think it is one of the most powerful dynamics for us to grasp. Neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to shift direction, to rewire, to create new pathways. So those sensations that we abandon and those thoughts are interconnected, and then we respond in the same way. So it's like laying down a very hard path in our brain. People will often go, well, how do I release the pattern? What does it mean to actually release the pattern? It means I relinquish the belief first that that's the only thing that I can do to support myself. And when we create new habits like those morning routines, like meditation, like yoga, like spending time in contemplative practices and honoring our connections, that opens our brain up to, oh, we don't have to go down that same path that we did when we were stressed or when we had fear. Let's create a new way. That's the neuroplasticity. So, the ability to change and rewire the path, release our patterns, happens when we create a new flow. when we create a new habit because we have to do something different
Mhm.
than we've always done. And what I try to help people understand is you can't wait until the game to learn the plays,
Mhm.
which is just an analogy around it's in the daily moments of shifting your patterns that when crisis comes, you've already built a new pathway
That's right.
because in the moment we're flooded and we're going to revert back to our automatic patterns. So the things that you do when you're not in crisis or you're not overwhelmed, they're setting you up for that neuroplasticity and that rewiring. And our spirituality and our faith is a central factor because often at the core of that is hope that better is possible and that I'm not stuck, regardless of how old I am. We have the ability to create a new pathway as long as we are living. And that
Mm.
is so powerful, in my opinion.
Yes, in both in faith and in science is demonstrating
Yes.
this. I mean, we still have some old school, but for so long we've been thinking, the brain is finite, experience is finite, and oh, we're burning up all our brain cells and these things, and we're actually this like remarkable regenerative,
Yes.
brilliant,
Hmm.
intelligence, intelligent being
Yeah.
and consciousness beyond our ability to comprehend, really.
Right.
But the science is giving us peeks now into how we don't have to, that when we age, we're not just losing brain cells and becoming
No,
static
not at
and
all.
all of these things,
Yeah.
so it's exciting.
Yeah.
And it's the things that we do, the habits that we have in our thinking.
Yeah.
If
In our
we
thinking.
think over and over negative thoughts, we become concretized.
Yeah, we do. And that makes it difficult to want to choose anything different. But like you said just a moment ago, we are conscious and powerful
Mhm.
beings, and we can choose. Just like we've chosen to have that thought on repeat, we can also choose to think differently. One of the things that I also try to encourage people to understand is the power of visualization
Mhm.
in that the brain actually cannot distinguish over between our imagination and reality if our imagination is part of what becomes our reality. So what does that mean? That means that even before you're even ready to maybe choose a different pattern, there's so much significance and rewiring that is created by just taking time to see yourself doing something different or
Mhm.
see yourself speaking in a different way. We become what we believe.
Mhm.
So if we tell ourselves what we want to become over and over, at a certain point, you're going to start to go, maybe this doesn't always happen to me. And even if it does, I still have something to say. And I think I like that better than not saying anything all because then I feel like I can express myself. So if I say that to myself, eventually my actions are going to want to connect. My spirit is going to want to connect with that new thought and that new pathway because our brain loves success. It
Mhm.
loves to feel joy. And we don't experience that same joy when we're telling ourselves those same kind of expired thoughts over and over again. Those are the things that don't make us feel great.
Right, right. And you're reminding me of studies that were done like in the 90s and 80s even, where they would study athletes who would do visualization,
Yes.
right? Imagining, hitting it in the basket or
Yeah.
hitting the
Yeah.
golf ball or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that actually had impact. That was like practicing, maybe not
Yeah.
the same thing as being on the court or on the field, but it improved
Hmm.
a player's performance. And
Significantly. Yeah.
yeah,
I
and
have oh, go ahead, finish.
we're the same.
Yes. No, I was going to say, and I have a quick story about that. My son is an athlete. He plays basketball in college. And so a few years ago, he had an injury that was going to take him out for the season.
Mm,
And so one of his biggest concerns was, hey, there's a lot of muscle memory that I'm going to lose because I'm not engaging in that practice and that pattern over and over. And I said, well, I know I'm just mom, but are you willing to go on this journey with me where I can teach you about visualizing yourself, still engaging in those things so that when you get back on the court, your muscle memory and mind brain connection, because your mind tells your body to move, will still be there as if it never stopped firing off. And he was like, well, I'm out for a year, so I guess I have nothing to lose. All that being said, it was 365 days from the moment he was told you need to take some time off to when he actually got back on the court. We worked on that visualization and he picked right up where he left off as if nothing had ever stopped. And it gave his brain something hopeful to focus on versus the pain of recovery or the fear that a lot of us experience. Can I be what I once was? Will I be able to get back to where I am? And I'll also just caveat and say, if you're listening or watching and you've experienced chronic pain, visualizing yourself in a time where you did not experience pain is highly beneficial to your spirit, to your body, and to
Mm,
your mind.
that's really, really helpful. That's really helpful. And there it is, rewiring it,
Yeah.
really rewiring it. You brought up COVID, that you wrote this book during COVID. And that was a really challenging time for everyone for different reasons. And, I want to talk a little bit about, I don't feel like the challenge of these times, I feel like we are living in challenging times.
Yeah.
Like these are uniquely challenging times. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing
Mhm.
and how you're helping people cope.
Yeah. One thing that I saw and am continuing to see is people having to grasp constant loss,
Mhm.
whether it was the actual loss of someone that they love or feeling like they lost time or lost connection.
Mhm.
And what I feel like many people have expressed within even the last 6 months is an increased desire to reconnect, right? There was a season where connecting was fearful for many and didn't feel like it was something that people could trust. And then people got kind of low by feeling isolated or not having the depth of those connections. So there is this hunger that appears to be very present where people have acknowledged, I'm really ready to fully leave this season of loneliness and I want to connect and I want to trust. I also feel like managing and navigating through COVID kind of took everybody's mask off
Mm.
when it came to humanizing. We're all managing some difficulty. We went from if you did something, you had to look perfectly pristine and always needed to seem like everything was great to people being more willing to go. If I asked, how are you? I'm okay. It hasn't been a great day, but I'm working through it. Whereas I feel like the connotation before was like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm great. So there is also this openness and this transparency that people are more willing to acknowledge because I think values have shifted
Mhm.
and people also identified what's really meaningful because here are all these things that I thought were meaningful. And now that I recognize they can go away quickly,
Mhm.
do I want to go back to giving them that level of meaning, or do I really want to find a more adaptable or sustainable place to have meaning and purpose? So there are some really powerful paradigms that are happening, and I feel like a lot of people are much more open to connecting those dots and getting to know themselves in really unique ways.
Mm. Mm. Really, really helpful and interesting. The other thing that comes to mind, and that, I think all of us with kids and grandkids and are concerned about is our children now, and the impact not only of COVID, but of, you know, school shootings, you know, police beatings, the attack on LGBTQ people, the attack on people of color. And I, it's, I mean, it's always been a little scary, I mean, for
Yeah.
our
Sure.
children, you know,
Yeah.
but it's so heightened and in the media. And, you know, what are your thoughts, and
Yeah.
how do we help our kids?
One is it's important for us to really understand that the childhood that our kids and our grandkids are experiencing is not the same one that we experienced. So it's important for us to listen and really hear them and take their communication more, give it more magnitude than maybe we would. I think we used to kind of go, oh, you're just a child. What do you know about this? You don't have anything to worry about. And I do not believe that that's accurate, because we're seeing all of these experiences that you've mentioned around marginalized groups or lack of safety or shootings at everything from schools to a parade. So
Mhm.
there is this looming dynamic that they have lost of, I have this carefree childhood, and I don't think many of us even realized that we could actually pass away. Honestly, until we hit like our 30s, we thought you were supposed to just have high school and all these different things, and it was going to go a certain way. So I believe that they're much more fragile, rightfully so,
Mhm.
than we think. And what can we do? We can listen,
Mhm.
we can connect, which means it's important for us to really stay in relationship with our children and our grandchildren, and know it's not about what we can give them, but it's about quality time. It's
Mhm.
about staying connected to their heart and allowing them to feel like, I will hold space for you, even if I don't understand or don't have all the answers. They're not always looking for you to have an answer. They just want to know that you care. So listen, connect, and then protect means, let's be cautious of not overexposing them. Really, maybe considering as a family, how much time do we need to spend on the media and having things streamed into our home? Because even if it's just on in the background, it still creates this presence and this intensity and all of these visuals that can overwhelm and be flooding, and you can't look at your children or your grandchildren and know they're not okay. And that's why we really have to help them find space to have these conversations and keep them current, keep them fresh. And I think we can share. We
Mhm.
can share that, appropriately. Man, sometimes it's really hard when I let you out the door, because there's so much going on that I just love you and want you to be safe. And even though that sounds small and mildly overprotective, it just lets them know, I have fears just like you have fears. And it's okay for us to talk about them.
Mhm.
Even if something's not happening, let's just normalize and humanize that we all have times that we worry, but we also have each other.
Mm, yeah, and that doesn't sound overprotected to me. That sounds really heartfelt and connective, and something that they can hold.
Hmm.
And you're describing being present with them,
Hmm.
and to be present with them, you have to be present with yourself,
Yes.
which is why people should get your book,
Yes.
Expired Mindsets,
Mhm.
Releasing Patterns That No Longer Serve You Well. And this has just been really a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate having the time with you, and yeah, sharing your book with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, because my heart is definitely just to have these meaningful and courageous conversations and provide a tool or resource that is there and with you, just like you were always going to be there and with you every step of the way.
Thank you so much, Charryse.
Thank you.